Hello friends, my name is Adnan Qaiser. You must have seen me earlier at YouTube as well. And if those of you who have seen my introductory part on Islamic radicalism would know that I plan to give a series of talks on what constitutes religious terrorism, which unfortunately is connected to the peaceful religion of Islam. So we are trying to understand the mindset or the strategy and tactics or the motivating factors of these jihadists or radical militants which have threatened the world peace and security in the name of Islam. So basic idea is to de-link the name of Islam from these jihadists who use and find justification behind Quranic verses to legitimize their acts of terror and violence. So this this present talk is another is one of the continuation of our discussion. And in this, ladies and gentlemen, I will figure out the festering of religious terrorism into the African continent. I will focus on Boko Haram in this talk, which is an Islamist terror organization in Nigeria. In war, ladies and gentlemen, there is no substitute for victory. Though the two failed wars in Iraq and Afghanistan turned the war on terror into a misnomer. It calls for what the Prussian general and strategist Clausewitz had called as the first principle of war. He had emphasized on the selection and maintenance of aim as the first principle of war, which is very much needed these days to purge the world from the scourge of this terrorism or religious terrorism. So sharing the religious dogmas and objectives of Al-Qaeda and Daesh, you know what Daesh is known as Islamic State or ISIS or ISIL. So the Islamist terror organizations in Sahel, in Nigeria, in the African continent, such as the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara or ISGS, the Islamic State West Africa province, which is called as ISWAP, and Boko Haram. They all aim to impose Sharia law in the region. However, to establish their writ and fear among the people and to discredit the sitting governments, these militant organizations unleash a reign of terror by killing innocent civilians mercilessly and indiscriminately. I would refer you to a report which was published in Al Jazeera by Rashid Abdullah on 28th November 2019. It was titled, "ISIL is not dead, it just moved to Africa." So two latest scholarships on Islamist militants in Africa give a wake-up call to the world about dangerous proliferation of religious terrorism in the African continent. The first one is titled Horn, Sahel and Rift, Fault Lines of the African Jihad by Stig Jarle Hansen. And the other is called Everything You Told Me Is True, The Many Faces of Al-Shabaab by Mary Harper. Regrettably, the international community has lost little sleep over the appalling state of the hapless citizens of the African region. Any counter-terrorism effort, ladies and gentlemen, must bear in mind that the radical militancy and the faith-based terrorism do not result from fundamental ideology alone. More often than not, it is driven by abject poverty, socio-economic injustice, and unemployment too. Moreover, the autocratic regimes and the oppressive monarchies in the Islamic world remain a bane for ordinary Muslims. West's propping up of these despotic rulers in the Middle East and African countries for West's own foreign policy objectives, which revolve around the provision of cheap oil, resulted in alienation of the Muslim population from the West. So thus, even if a majority of the Muslim population or the Islamic faith followers are not extremists by nature, and they loathe the very acts of terror, a large segment remains sympathetic to the cause of the militants. This is very important to understand, that they do not recommend terror, but they remain sympathetic to their cause. So, seen as the religious reformists, sometimes the population sees them as religious reformists, nationalists, or freedom fighter for the cause of the religion. Since these religious ideologues are radical runaways, illegal armed groups, and criminal elements, they are basically opportunistic in nature. So that's why, finding sympathy among the local population, they establish their fiefdoms in countries which are ruled by tyranny, or riven with ethnic strife, religious conflicts, predatory or corrupt governments, and destitute and impoverished population. So while the international community remained transfixed on Al-Qaeda, and Daesh, Boko Haram had been bombing schools, churches, and mosques, indiscriminately killing and maiming innocent civilians at will. It has kidnapped women and children, as well as assassinated politicians, religious leaders with impunity. 19 November 2015 CNN report by Katie Pisa and Tim Hume titled "Boko Haram Overtakes ISIS as World's Deadliest Terror Group." Quotes from the Global Terrorism Index, according to the report, Boko Haram had killed 6,644 people in year 2014, an increase of more than 300% from the previous year, which was 2013. So originated in 2012 as an offshoot of a Salafist movement. In other section, I will tell you about what is a Salafist and what is a Wahhabist and what is a Takfir. So as an offshoot of a Salafist movement in the Yobe state of Nigeria, Boko Haram's actual name is Jamaatul Ahlus Sunnah Lida Awati Wal Jihad. I do not know if I have pronounced it properly, but in local Hausa dialect, Boko Haram means Western education is sinful. So, similar to the Al-Qaeda's indoctrination of Tehreek-e-Taliban or TTP in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and Daesh in Iraq and Syria, you know that Al-Qaeda remains the mother organization of all these terror groups, which later festered and proliferated. So Boko Haram also gained its terror expertise from Al-Qaeda and became proficient in making IEDs and VEDs. So IEDs stand for improvised explosive device, and VEDs is vehicular explosive devices. So the group also developed contacts for supply of weapons and arrangement of a transport fleet. So Boko Haram arranges its funds by exploiting: one, secret Middle Eastern and African donors providing overt and covert funding through illegitimate money laundering and terrorist financing channels. Overt funding, ladies and gentlemen, is basically made through grants or donations for mosques and madrasas. Madrasas are basically religious seminaries. Whereas covert funding is made for advancing a specific political cause of a group in the name of Islam, or for geopolitical purposes, or for subversive activities. Number two, organized criminal activities. So another source of funding is organized criminal activities like drugs trade and narcotics trade, extortion, illegal smuggling of goods, and kidnappings for ransom. Number three, acting as a mercenary or a protective force for Al-Qaeda and Daesh core. Core, ladies and gentlemen, means the top leadership or the central nucleus. Moreover, since suicide attacks require a lot of ideological motivation, psychological brainwashing, and spiritual indoctrination, Boko Haram also learned the craft of luring unsuspecting and poverty-ridden and unemployed youth for its ulterior motive of suicide attacks. Modern Nigeria, ladies and gentlemen, remained under British administrative rule as an indirectly governed colony under tribal chieftains since 1914. Nigeria gained its independent status in year 1960, but only to see a very deadly and ferocious civil war between 1967 and 1970. Thereafter, Nigeria as a country had been alternately ruled by democratically elected governments as well as dictatorships until stable democracy returned to the country, to Nigeria, in year 1999. Followed by the presidential elections which were held in 2015, in which President Muhammadu Buhari came into power. Urban Nigeria has become fairly progressive. The country is administratively divided into 36 states. You may call them provinces, out of which 12 are dominated by Muslims, mostly populated on the northern part of the country. However, Nigeria's periphery areas or rural areas are remained out of the purview of the central government and are ruled by the tribal chieftains. So, Nigeria's 350 ethnic groups speaking nearly 520 diverse languages keep Nigeria's 191 million population, these are 2017's figure, hostage to their orthodox belief, medieval mindset, and conservative rituals. So that ultimately connects with what we are going to discuss. So in his book in 2017 titled Boko Haram, The History of an African Jihadist Movement, Alexander Thurston, he documents Boko Haram's support for Ali Modu Sharif's governorship in the Borno state between 2002 and 2009. Then Boko Haram became part of the state governorate after Sharif's victory in the election. When a close confidant of the chief of Boko Haram, he was appointed as the governor's commissioner for religious affairs of the Borno state. In a brutal police crackdown in July 2009, Boko Haram's founder and its leader of the past 7 years, his name was Muhammad Yusuf. He was hounded and killed along with hundreds of members of Boko Haram. Yusuf, who was hiding in his father-in-law's house, was shot dead by the police in an execution-style killing. It was videotaped and disseminated for the deterrence and propaganda purposes, which decimated the moderate ranks of Boko Haram to a larger extent. However, Yusuf's death led Boko Haram splitting into different factions. According to some estimates, Boko Haram comprises between 4,000 and 6,000 hardcore Islamist militants, with no dearth of new recruits, because of poverty and unemployment, massive in the region. So, having remained dormant since 2009, a new group emerged in year 2011 under the name of Yusufiya Islamic Movement, expressing concerns over the targeting of the civilians and loss of innocent lives. The group called for reconciliation with the government. Then in 2012, another group of dissidents surfaced called Jamaatul Ansaril Muslimina fi Biladis Sudan. Forgive me for my pathetic pronunciation. It means vanguard for the protection of Muslims in Black Africa. So this militant outfit, commonly known as Ansaru, parted ways on the plea that the killings of local and implementation of strict Sharia law would reduce the regional appeal or popularity of Boko Haram among the local population. So thus Ansaru started targeting foreigners in the region. However, despite carrying out a major prison break in Abuja in 2012, followed by the kidnapping of a French engineer, Ansaru has largely remained inactive since 2015. Yusuf's killing, however, resulted in Boko Haram morphing into two main splinter groups, both ferocious and deadly in their nature and their terror. Led by Abu Musab al-Barnawi. Abu Musab al-Barnawi, said to be the son of Yusuf. The first group is called the Islamic State West Africa Province, or ISWAP, and the second one is the original Jamaatul Ahlus Sunnah Lidawati wal Jihad. So it means people committed to the propagation of Prophet's teaching and jihad. That is the translation. So this group, the second group, is commanded by Yusuf's deputy, Abu Bakr Sheikhu. If this presentation gets published, obviously you are going to get the end notes, and then you will get the due references in due course. However, meanwhile, for your background reading, ladies and gentlemen, I would recommend you to go through one International Crisis Group's report, number 273, Africa. It is dated 16th of May 2019. It is titled Facing the Challenge of the Islamic State in West Africa Province. Secondly, go through the Jamestown Foundation's publication, Terrorism Monitor Volume 17, issue number 12, dated 14th June 2019. It is titled Boko Haram Factionalization. Who are Islamic State in West Africa Province, ISWAP? So, Fighters in Nigeria and Chad by Jacob Zen. So, Sheikhu, ladies and gentlemen, remains largely elusive and evasive. Using the alias of Darul Tawheed, analysts describe him a ruthless loner and master of disguise. He does not speak directly with his group members, opting to communicate only through a few select confidants. Virginia Comolli notes in her book Boko Haram, Nigeria's Islamist insurgency, that the radical faction of Boko Haram regrouped itself between 2009 and 2011 under Abu Bakr Sheikhu and began an insurgent campaign against the central government. Between 2011 and 2015, the scale and scope of terrorist attacks and other criminal activities drastically increased. The training and support provided by Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, which is AQIM, Somalia's Al-Shabaab, and Iraq's Daesh or ISIS, granted expertise to this group in carrying out in carrying out a steady string of assassinations and target attacks, including suicide bombings. These attacks were not only aimed at civilian population, but also aimed at the security forces of Nigeria, as well as surrounding countries. So the group's survival basically comes from the sympathy, cooperation, and protection from the local population due to three factors. Initially I told you that the problem or the curse of religious terrorism has a connection with abject poverty, unemployment, and dissatisfaction among the local population. So three factors are very important for the cooperation that is extended by the local population. One, out of terror and fear and ruthlessness of these militant groups. Number two, public support for the enforcement of Sharia law. I initially told you that the local population have a medieval mindset. They still want to practice their orthodox view. So that's why they prefer to have a Sharia law in their areas. Number three, local population has gone totally alienated from the central Nigerian government, as well as the governorates, considering them to be thoroughly corrupt and incompetent. Although the northern Nigerian Muslims abhor violence, their abject poverty, the apathy and incompetence of the central government, and the brutalities at the hands of Nigerian security forces make them look the other way, while Boko Haram let loose a reign of terror in their region. Rights groups have accused the local authorities for carrying out human rights violations in their fight against the militant groups like Boko Haram, which further fuels anti-government sentiments or resentment among the native population. So, similar to the Taliban's governance model in Afghanistan, ladies and gentlemen, Boko Haram's factions also provide, number one, dispute resolution services, cheap justice, microfinance loans to local youth and farmers, Islamic education, healthcare, and public services in the areas that they control. So their services are prompt, impartial, and just, far better than what the central government or the governorates offer to their citizens. While ruthless in nature, Boko Haram's sustainability and longevity, if not popularity, ladies and gentlemen, lie in the actual good that it provides to the public under its rule. It must be kept in mind that the strategy and tactics of Al-Qaeda and Daesh differed drastically. While Al-Qaeda strived for winning and controlling the hearts and minds of the masses through its ideological propagation, Daesh focused on the physical control of territory for a public display of its global caliphate. This is done in line with the jihadists' master plan or a 7-stage strategy. May it be in Iraq or Syria or in the Khorasan province in Afghanistan. So Al-Qaeda or Daesh 7-stage strategy, ladies and gentlemen, comprised of the awakening stage from 2000 to 2003, the eye-opening stage from 2003 to 2006, the stage of standing up from 2007 to 2010, the stage of recuperation from 2010 to 2013, the stage of declaring the state or the Islamic State from 2013 to 2016, the stage of absolute confrontation from 2016 to 2018, and seventh, the stage of final victory from 2018 to 2020. While I will discuss the 7-stage strategy in full detail in another section, when I discuss the philosophical and transformation of Al-Qaeda to Daesh, but this is just for your basic understanding that this unfortunately did not came out to be true, but all these stages had been aligned, and we saw them happening actually in Iraq and Syria. So you may find they are given in great length in Brian H. Fishman's scholarship titled "The Master Plan: ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Jihadi Strategy for the Final Victory." At the internet, the 7-stage strategy, ladies and gentlemen, is available at FDD's Long War Journal under the title of "The 7 Phases of the Base" by Bill Roggio, dated 15th August 2005. Very instructive to read. So likewise, under Daesh influence, Boko Haram also transitioned into a mature terrorist organization, carrying out territorial control attacks in the northeastern part of Nigeria and certain parts of Chad, Niger, and Cameroon, the neighboring countries. So rather than carrying out its initial stage or tactics of hit and run attacks. So as mentioned earlier, that since the peripheral areas of Nigeria and many of the African countries remain largely ungoverned by the central governments or the governorates, so the tribal chiefdoms of the Kanori and Hausa Fulani tribes in Nigeria and neighboring Chad, Niger, and Cameroon not only granted Boko Haram a safe haven in their land, but they also provided young militants from their tribes as foot soldiers. This the tribal chiefs did in exchange for 3 things: security, funds, and protection from the attacks by Boko Haram. So such territorial freedom, ladies and gentlemen, allowed Boko Haram to establish its writ and fiefdom through fear in those in many states in Nigeria, such as Borno in the northeast, Yobe, Gombe, Adamawa, Kano, Bauchi, and Kaduna, and along the Kamaduga, Yobe River and the border of Niger and Chad. So having established his control over almost 2/3 of the Borno state, Abu Bakr Shehu, who had the second faction, pledged allegiance to Daesh Abu Bakr Baghdadi, the former caliph of Daesh. And Shehu then seated his own caliphate in Mubi, next to Cameroon, in 2015. Shehu also enforced Sharia in the occupied territory under his control and appointed emirs in the adjoining states of Dikwa, Gowoza, Dambo, and Bama. Using the lawless Borno state as the statelet's capital, the militant group operates and seek refuge in the Sambisa forest near Maiduguri. Boko Haram, ladies and gentlemen, rattled the world with deep concerns for the first time. When the world realizes the proliferation of religious terrorism in the African continent, when it abducted 276 schoolgirls from Chibok town in April 2014. Despite recovery of some girls in the past 5 years, 112 still remain untraceable and missing. In all likelihood, these captive girls would be treated as sex slaves in the garb of wives for the fugitive fighters or the militants, similar to how Daesh enlisted the captured Yazidi women as well as the foreign volunteer women as wives for their fighters in Iraq and Syria. But the question is, why the United States and the international community have not taken any serious measures against Boko Haram so far? The answer lies in the terror group's activities limiting only to the African continent or that region, the Borno state. And it is not threatening the world at large or the security of the international world order like Al-Qaeda or Daesh did in their times. So without putting the boots on the ground, the United States has restricted its role to putting a $7 million bounty on Abu Bakr Sheikhu's head. America has also designated Boko Haram as a foreign terrorist network, or FTO, or foreign terrorist organization. But it has not taken any serious measures against any Boko Haram. It is also, the United States has also provided technical and financial support to the Nigerian forces which are battling the insurgency. In view of and why it has not come into the question arises why it is not the American priority. So the answer lies in view of the America's national security strategy, which came out in 2017. Pentagon's focus, ladies and gentlemen, shifted towards its strategic geopolitical competition with Russia and China. So, however, causing a concern among the Americans' European allies, the reports about Washington considering a major reduction in its troops in Africa, as well as potential cuts to the United Nations mission in Mali, amounts to taking the eye off the ball towards of this global terrorism. So Olivier Remy Bell, a visiting fellow at the Atlantic, he noted in the War on the Rocks on 24th January 2020, he said, for the people in the Sahel, a United States retreat would leave them even more vulnerable to future terrorist attacks. Simply put, an American withdrawal would be penny wise but pound foolish. However, Boko Haram's terrorist outreach in insurgency campaign as a guerrilla outfit belatedly woke up the governments of Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger to launch a full-fledged military operation against the terror group in 2015. The killing of innocent civilians in the name of Islam further fueled a loathsome feeling among the local Muslim population, turning them against the militant group. So having harbored and protected the terrorists in the past out of fear or support for the Sharia law, people changed their mind lately and started to cooperate with the security forces of Nigeria. And they helped in hounding and eliminating the radicals who were hiding among their ranks of the local population. So wresting control of land from them, from Boko Haram, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari, he declared the terror group's technical defeat in 2015. I do not know what does it imply, but he professed that Nigeria has technically defeated Boko Haram. The independent commentators also noted the group's radical decline, and Reuters news agency carried out a map on the run of the terrorist groups in 2015. However, Boko Haram's total rout remains a far cry, ladies and gentlemen. It's far from over. While Boko Haram may not be in a position to launch large-scale conventional attacks against the security forces or population centers, the outfit still carries, The outfit still carries the wherewithal to carry out suicide bombing attacks and IEDs and VEDs attacks on the security forces. So between 2016 and 2018, the conflict consumed nearly 2,000 lives, one-fifth of 2015's total when the war was at its peak. So Boko Haram's insurgency, the most violent years occurred in 2014 and 2015. Mind you, in 2015, a military campaign also started, so that's how the casualties rose. In 2014 and 2015, Boko Haram targeted more and more civilian population just to establish its fear and dread among the people. So subsequent to its factionalization and transformation in its strategy and tactics, the terror group had already started targeting the security forces, which gained impetus in response to the military campaign, which I said in 2015, exceeding its previous total of 450 in 2014. Boko Haram killed 459 members of Nigeria's state security in year 2018. Now, the Nigerian government's response, on the other hand, remains irresolute and vacillating, unfortunately. On one hand, the military uses indiscriminate use of force or high-handedness or disproportionate use of force as a reactive response, causing severe collateral damage, causing massive civilian casualties. On the other hand, the long interludes in between the military operations, on the other hand, on the pretext of protecting the local civilian population, allow the insurgents to regroup, refresh, and rearm. So, furthermore, in order to safeguard army's smaller installations coming under frequent insurgent attacks, and to reduce the Nigerian army's war attrition, the Nigerian military has retreated to better protected super camps, which is pretty unfortunate. But this withdrawal of troops to super camps, which are more fortified, displays army's half-heartedness in a battle which is fought for the writ and survival of Nigerian state. Remember, in the beginning I told you about Clausewitz's selection and maintenance of aim, which is the first principle of all war. And unfortunately, the Nigerian government or the military forces, they have not shown their resolve in this regard. So by ceding control of vast swaths of rural areas and forsaking the hapless population at the mercy of the militants, the military has essentially allowed the terrorists to run riot with their violence in that region. Moreover, causing a security vacuum, Chad's decision to withdraw its 1,200 soldiers fighting Boko Haram in Nigeria as part of the multinational joint task force of the Lake Chad Basin Commission in January 2020 not only gave a wrong message to others about military's dithering and weakness, but also forced hundreds of poor residents of the area of Ganjigana to flee to Maiduguri, the capital of Nigeria's Borno state, because obviously, since they stopped cooperating with the militants, they came under attack as well to face the wrath of the radical terrorists or whatever. So the war against Islamist terror groups, ladies and gentlemen, remains a long-drawn, arduous, and a time-consuming campaign. It needs a continued commitment in order to counter the narrative of these religious zealots and radical ideologues, and to put an end to their mindless terror, it is imperative to first understand the dynamics of Islamic radicalism first. Without addressing the fundamental causes that afflict the Muslim world, religious terrorism, I don't think we would be able to eradicate fully. And I will discuss these causes in subsequent episodes as well. The basic element is about politics, about the discontentment among the people in the Middle Eastern country, among the Muslim world, from the repressive regimes in the African continent as well as in the Middle East. So the recommendation to eradicate religious terrorism, one could be addressing the political grievances of local population, granting them their democratic rights, removing their impoverishment and privation or economic hardships, instituting socio-economic justice or reforms in the society. Number two, providing a better governance model as an alternate to the strict Sharia law which people aspire. Number three, based on the Islamic tenets of ijma and ijtihad, offering an unbiased and legitimate counter-narrative to the jihadist ideology. As explained by me in the introductory part of this discussion series, ijma, ladies and gentlemen, is a consensus of the Islamic scholars on the precepts of Islamic code of conduct and law. And ijma and ijtihad is a thorough deliberation by scholars of eminence and in Islamic jurisprudence to find a solution to an Islamic legal issue, or to redefine or reinterpret the injunctions, any Islamic injunctions' relevance according to the present need, present age and time and need as well. So I would encourage you to refer to a special report number 125 of August 2004, prepared by the United States Institute for Peace. It is titled Ijtihad, Reinterpreting Islamic Principles for the 21st Century. So that basically aligns the tenets or injunctions of Islam with the present day need of Muslims. So coming back to our recommendations, number four is using sustained, rigorous, and uninterrupted kinetic force to crush and exterminate the criminal mafias and the terrorist bands. In other parts, I would tell you that there is a small group of religious ideologues which are being supported as a protection force or a mercenary force by criminal bands who are advancing their own agendas in line with using terror with these ideologues. So I strongly believe while this smug and irresolute African Union governments, they keep flying their flags of peace and security without the support of their mosques, the international community must come forward to wipe out terror from this region as it did to Al-Qaeda and Daesh in the Middle East and other areas. So Shakespeare had noted in The Merchant of Venice, he said, the devil can cite scripture for his purpose. The devil can cite scripture for his purpose. An evil soul producing holy witness is like a villain with a smiling cheek, a goodly apple rotten at the heart. Excuse me. Oh, what a goodly outside falsehood hath. So that's why the plague of religious terrorism, ladies and gentlemen, cannot be blamed on Islamic faith. So we have to disconnect and de-link the religion of Islam from what these terror groups propagate. It's very important to understand the guiding principles of these terror groups, understand their ideology, and then de-link it from the faith. So this, I believe, with this I conclude this episode, ladies and gentlemen. I will be subsequently giving other parts of this discussion in due course, which I had mentioned in the introductory part. So stay tuned for further discussion on Islamic radicalism. This is Adnan Qaiser signing off. Until next time, take good care and bye.